Hello, everyone. Welcome to an amazing, very special episode of Outside the Studio. My name is Tessa. I am your host. If you are new to the podcast, welcome. I'm so happy you are here. In particular, today to join me in welcoming Jovanka Ciares. She's the author of Reclaiming Wellness. It is a beautiful book. I will show it to you in just a moment, for those of you that are watching online. And she's also a certified wellness expert, an integrative herbalist, a nutrition educator, a coach. She offers lectures and workshops in Spanish and English. Ciares studied nutrition with best-selling author T. Colin Campbell, PhD, at his Center for Nutrition Studies, which is in partnership with Cornell University, which included studying herbalism, plant medicine, with, I'm going to butcher this, Tiarona? How do you say that? Tiarona Lodog, MD, a native of Puerto Rico. She lives in Los Angeles. Oh, LA, I love LA. So welcome to the show, Jovanka. How are you today?
Thank you. I'm really well. Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, of course. And congrats on the book. It came out April 19th, I believe.
Yes.
2022. Good date. I'm going to hold up this beautiful book, Reclaiming Wellness. And so what's really cool, I find this to be so unique because it's like there's so many different modalities of healing, and it's really far beyond what you would get in, I guess what I would say a traditional wellness book would mean. And what jumped out to me right away, Jovanka, was there's a section on music and community in healing, which put me right back into childhood. Just a really quick little background story on me. I grew up in a family that was always dancing. There was always music. My dad made drums for a period of time, and we even had a sweat lodge in our backyard. We had this spirituality practice of having an altar and having drum circles, and so there was always music, there was always dancing, and both of my parents were pretty musical. And so when I read that, I was like, oh, that was a form of healing for us. Mm-hmm. And I never really considered it that way. So here I am, almost 40, realizing that my family was using this practice of healing back when I was a little one, and we needed it. And it was so grounding, and it was so joyful, and those are the best memories I have of my childhood. And that's something that I come back to over and over again as an adult, to settle my nervous system and to feel like I can be in my body in a safe way, in a joyous way. So I'd love to jump off there. Can you tell me about this and how it wound its way into your book and what it means to you?
Sure. Well, first of all, thank you for having me.
Yeah.
Secondly, I'd love to meet your father.
Oh, yeah, he's a great guy.
Sounds like a super cool guy.
Yeah.
And like you, I had a very musical family. My grandfather was the only music teacher at some point in my little town of Canóvanas, Puerto Rico. And he was the one that, like we would sit together in the balcony while my grandfather will be in the garage or in his little room teaching students over. It was a roster of students coming through for an entire day. And people have my mother still has one of the most beautiful singing voices I've ever heard. And music was my first love. So I studied music in college. I played several instruments. I was a singer at some point. So when you learn about music and the power of music, you really delve deep into how more than healing is just, it allows our animal parts to emote, right? To connect with an emotion. And I say animal parts because it's not just humans, right? We know that animals, like your pet cats and dogs, will react really to music or to certain sounds. And but even before, like beyond that, you don't have to be an expert, a musical expert, or have a degree to understand that music has the ability to move us and move us in all kinds of different directions. Now we know that is an incredibly powerful tool for healing trauma, healing relationships, etc. Healing from a physical ailment. So to me, it was a very natural thing to include. It is also included in the same chapter as community, and people ask me this question all the time. And it is because we can, in fact, enjoy music on our own. But even when we are alone, we're really not alone, right? We are there with the people that recorded that piece, that played those instruments, that created the songs or the pieces that are moving us. And certainly when we come together socially to enjoy music, that's when it becomes really a powerful tool, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I think of it as the great equalizer. You know, if
Mm-hmm.
you think about a dance floor and the way that music, at least in my body, helps me, like I said, get grounded and settle and feel like my body is a safe space, it is a joyous space. And and then it's almost like everything else doesn't matter. The rest of the world kind of floats away. And I personally, I've read stories about this in certain traditions where dancing is a medicine that it's like there's a ritual of dance that will last all night. I think there's certain Native American myths where it's like coyote danced and until the dawn, and Coyote is this character maybe who's kind of like wily and a little bit mischievous, and there's some sort of medicine in that for this character. So I wonder if you have any stories or experiences along those lines that speak to medicine as healing and helping us move through something, some
Mm-hmm.
emotion. Like I know it can take us in so many different directions.
Yeah. What you said is a great equalizer is a really powerful statement because it is very true. You walk into a club, the easiest way to see that is walking into a concert is a little bit less obvious, but if you walk into, say, like a club, like a young 25 and up club,
Mm-hmm.
and you see people of all shapes, all colors, all potentially all nationalities enjoying this one piece of music and not worrying, not caring about any problems they left behind, what they looked like, the problems of society, their socioeconomic background. None of that is important. In this moment, we are bonding, we are human, we are allowing our bodies to do whatever it needs to do to heal or to enjoy or to bond or to feel joy.
Mm-hmm.
I you know when I was a lot younger and I was clubbing a lot more, we were we had all kinds of fun stories of people that we met through the dance floor that otherwise we wouldn't have anything in common with or seemingly nothing in common with. When I lived in New York, I used to go to salsa clubs a lot, and I would just go and sit around and waited for, in New York City, to give you a little bit of background, you dance two different kinds of salsa in one and salsa in two. And it could get really testy, right? Like, because the people that believe in one style are very particular and vice versa. So I would sit around and wait for this 60-year-old gentleman to show up. And for the first time, you didn't feel like this person was trying to pick you up or was trying to do something silly. They just would show up and we would know each other and we would just give each other a hug and said nothing. And immediately started dancing, and we'll dance 5 or 6 pieces in a row until one of us was too tired to keep going.
Mm-hmm.
And those stories to me are some of the most joyful memories I have.
I love that so much. I met my husband in a little town in southern Oregon with one salsa bar in it. It was called Taboo. And he and I used to salsa dance together two or three two or three nights a week as
Oh,
college students. And it was the thing, probably, I would say, that swept me up, literally swept me off my feet. And it was, I felt like there are moments in dance, in salsa in particular for me, where it feels like I'm flying. Do you ever
oh,
experience that?
it's the most amazing feeling in the
Right?
world.
Yeah. It's so incredible. So, and I know like for the past few years it's been tough because it
Yeah.
almost feels like that has been taken away from us in the sense that social gathering in that way isn't so safe, right? And so as we come back to our sense of community and things open up again, I wonder, is there some lesson in that? Is there a way we can move forward and come back together in community and heal in this new
Yeah,
world?
one of the things that I mentioned in the book, in that same chapter about community, is this concept of Ubuntu,
Mm.
which is a little bit more complex than just the lightness of going out and enjoying dancing. But it reminded what you just asked me, reminded me that there is always going to be an opportunity and a need to come together in community and heal, right? Find a way to come back into community. And while we are still trying to get through, pandemics and issues of, whatever is happening around the world, wars and all kinds of other things, um, we will still have the ability to come back to our humanity,
Mm.
recognize that humanity in others, and find a way to heal at a communal level.
Yeah.
I talk about the concept of Ubuntu, which we
Mhm.
can talk about a little bit more in detail. It's a little bit more complex, but it to me is the one concept beyond music that I wanted the world to know about. Just like similar to the concept of namaste, after you go to a yoga class, and that word is very common today. We know it relatively well. But the concept of Ubuntu, which is relatively similar, we don't as much. And I think just like it helped the South African immediately after apartheid moved into a reconciliation process
Mm.
with a little bit less pain, if you will,
Mm.
because pain will always be there, right? Hurt will always be there, and we always need to heal from that. But how do we reconcile from years of fill in the blank, hurt, trauma, harm, and recognize our humanity in each other so that we
Mm.
can live the best life we could?
Mm. Yeah. So is Ubuntu something that you say, or is it this sense and feeling? Is it both?
It's all of that and the practice. So it's
Okay.
a day to day practice. I think in the book I mentioned 9 attributes.
Uh-huh.
We're talking about things that are very common sense for most of
Mm.
us, right? Kindness, compassion, again, like seeing yourself in others. And I ask people to ask certain questions, and you can just take one of these particular attributes and practice it every day. Right? You can
Okay.
decide today I'm going to practice compassion.
Mm.
And then how do I practice compassion? Right? It's easier
Mhm.
said than done. And you ask yourself, how can I listen without necessarily trying to solve somebody else's problem, but just listening and being attentive? Can I truly offer more of myself to help somebody heal, or do I need to open myself up to the acceptance of new words or new character, let's call it like criticism for lack of a better word,
Yeah.
and so far so forth.
Mm.
Ubuntu is it can be applied to almost everything in your life,
Mhm.
right? The way you raise your children, the way you go about relationships at work, conflicts with your neighbor, people that you want to become closer to within your family or your partnership. It's a really beautiful philosophy
Mhm.
that once we start learning about it, it's almost like a prayer that you carry with you every single day.
Mm. That's beautiful. I love that. Thank you for sharing. So there's so many different cultural pieces that you draw from, so many different histories. Um, as it applies to wellness practices, I mean, we've already discussed a few. I'm wondering, as you're researching this book, if any of those surprised you.
Yes, the book explores the multicultural roots of a lot of these very popular wellness practices, because one of the struggles I had as a coach was getting people that sounded and looked like me to embrace some of these practices. And so I realized that it's people will think that they are far removed from them. And then I started to understand, okay, if I can get you excited about learning about the history of these practices, and once you learn about them, you learn to love them, and you realize that they're part of you, they're part of your ancestry, they come from people that passed it on from generation to generation, and somehow we, at the beginning of the 20th century, most likely kind of like put them aside and realized or forgot about all of them. So I wanted people to be excited about them. And so I started researching, and I was like, I'm going to find the ones that are very multicultural in nature, assuming that I was going to have a hard time finding more than just 2 or 3. And then I realized that quite a lot, almost all of them, stem from communities from all over the world. The ones that always come to mind is the use of essential oils. Because we think that it comes from this fancy little company somewhere in the United States that sell these tiny little amber color bottles, and they tend to be expensive in some cases, and nothing could be farther from the truth, right? The people in Northern Africa have been using these tiny bottles of oil infused, like deeply infused. In the Middle East, like even when the 3 kings went to visit baby Jesus, they brought in essential oils. So we know that they've been around for thousands of years. If you go farther east, you'll find even more of these practices. So I was really excited about it, and started, and as in my practice as an herbalist, I also teach people how to make them. Right? You don't need to, it doesn't have to be another line in your budget. If the budget doesn't allow, you can actually find some base oils and buy some, herbs, really, really basic herbs from the supermarket, and create your own little essential oils that then you can use and enjoy.
Ah, that's so cool. Well, and that brings to mind another chapter section where you really focus on water, oil, and heat, I believe. Those 3 things. Tell me more about this practice of.
So the reason why the chapter groups all 3 together is because throughout history, most of them have been used together. And water and heat, especially, so, and I'm talking about the use of saunas, steam rooms, natural baths that are ubiquitous in any corner and every corner of the world. So regardless of what you look like and where your family comes from, chances are your ancestors have used this. And so I decided to go around the world and mention some of the ones that are very popular in the Western world today. And in most of them, you'll realize that people embrace them in combination with the oils, because once you have a lot of heat and a lot of water, like your pores expand, and then your body can absorb different kinds of medicinal oils. So it's sort of a win-win. And to me, it's one of the easiest chapters to implement, because it's relatively inexpensive, right? Anybody can take a bath at home, and you could just buy a bottle of oil or some scented candles or some, other form of herb infused substance, and use it. And it might last you 3-4 months, and then you can enjoy it for that long.
Yeah, I love, that's one of my favorite self-care practices. And just, taking a bath, essential oils, even just something really simple like a jar of coconut oil, which is solid at room temperature. I'll take a scoop of that and put it in the bath, and then my skin is just so nourished, because you're right, your pores are open, so you do get to absorb more of the medicinal properties in that combination. I've never really thought about it like that, but so that's really cool. I love that. So I'm kind of thinking about this as it relates to like my personal life, and I know I'm not alone in this, in terms of our modern way of being on the go all the time and overscheduling ourselves, and just feeling like time is this slippery thing that we often let get away with time gets away from me, I guess. How do I want to say this question? Um, I guess the question is, okay, so there was a period of time during COVID where personally I felt like I got to relax a little bit. Things were shut down. I didn't have as much pressure on my shoulders, and I was really fortunate and lucky that I was able to enjoy that time, right? First time in my adult life where I felt like this is kind of an extended vacation.
Yeah.
And so I kind of started to enjoy that a little bit. And then the world has opened up, and now it almost feels like times 100, the pace of life has increased. And so I'm wondering what your thoughts are on how do we find that balance? Because
Mm.
practices like taking a bath and making time for dance and healing practices, it does require time out of your day
Mhm.
and to be intentional with that. Do you have any
Absolutely.
thoughts on how do we make that
Yeah.
a regular part of our lives?
Yeah. I absolutely agree with you. We all have very busy lives, right? And even those that didn't, for whatever reason, found themselves with a lot more time at the beginning of the pandemic, for example, after 2 or 3 weeks, and assuming that you went back to some sort of a normal routine, now all of a sudden you realize that the time that you thought you had is no longer there.
Yeah.
And every time I write, something, whether it is a blog post or a book or whatever it is, I think I put myself in the shoes of a single mother of two with a full-time job, right? If I was that woman, how do I find time for myself?
Mm-hmm.
And we all know what every expert will tell you. You kind of have to put your mask on first, and then
Yeah.
you have to take care of. That's easier said than done, right? Like
Yeah.
don't patronize a professional that happens to be a single mother, because she has clarity. What she needs to have is a plan. And
Mm.
so the book includes a very easy to follow plan. I do believe that you need to prioritize planning and making sure that you have clarity about what you want.
Mm.
While the book has 6 or 7 categories of wellness practices, and within each category, I mentioned a handful, it's impossible to expect that you are going to embrace them all at once. You could if you're one of those people, but that's not most of us. So I always encourage people on Saturday or Sunday, let's find an hour, right?
Mm.
An hour of time when you can sit down and wander around, either sit down or wander around the house and find 2 things. The time, when do you have 15 minutes every day? Right? Like now that you have a little bit more time to think about that, when do you have these 15 minutes to take care of yourself? And the second thing is, where is that space, right? Where in the home is it? Let's assume that you are a single mother of two, living in a 2-bedroom apartment. Chances are you don't have any personal space, but the bathroom will be, off limits or potentially empty from 5:30 to 6 a.m.
Mm-hmm.
That may mean that you have to wake up an extra half an hour early before everybody else, before the homes wakes up. But if you don't have clarity about that on Saturday, it will be a little bit easier for you to plan that. And then put it together, like put it in writing. I always like to sit down and say, on Monday, this is what I'm going to do. If Monday is too hard to wake up at 5:30, do not worry about it. There's always Tuesday. Sit and talk and plan it and say, on Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday, I'm going to wake up at 5:30 in the morning,
Mm-hmm.
and that half an hour is going to be mine
Mm-hmm.
to play some music, to have a nice cry, to read a book, to have a bath,
Mm-hmm.
to do nothing at all, just to check, IG or whatever it is that I want to check in, and have a time that is just mine. And because on average, it takes us 21 to 28 days to make that habit, to form that habit, and to make it long lasting. I ask people to then every single week for the next 4 weeks to make that plan.
Mm, yeah. Oh, that's a great idea. I love that. I have a similar practice of meal prepping and meal planning on
Mm-hmm.
Sundays, but I've never thought about planning my self-care out. And that sounds lovely. To me, there's nothing more nourishing than taking an hour or so out of my day than to just kind of like not have a plan and let
Mm-hmm.
myself kind of dream a little bit about what an ideal life would look like and
Yeah.
how I can practically insert some of that into my daily routine. So I think that's such a great idea. I kind of want to switch topics now because, as I mentioned my dad at the beginning, I wanted to note that he happens to be the president of a nonprofit company called Cannabis Patients Pacific Northwest.
Mm.
And I think this is something, cannabis, I think in general, is something that you are well versed in and, correct me if I'm wrong, but passionate about. And you're speaking about herbalism and stuff. And I think cannabis kind of falls in that category. So, and the book touches on it too, right? So would you speak to, I guess it's kind of a broad topic. I mean, in some states, like in the state that I'm currently in, cannabis is legal. It's a legal substance. Federal, it's still a criminal substance. So there's so many different directions we could go with that, but I'll just drop it and let you pick it up.
And then we can run with it after that.
Yeah.
Yeah, where I live is also legal. And, I was one of those people when I first, when I was a teenager. I remember my parents I come from a very conservative household where parents were very concerned about, whether we would go into the right path or the wrong path, and
Sure.
drugs of any kind. And of course, cannabis was considered one of those drugs were not acceptable, right? Not allowed. I didn't even drink coffee growing up. And so I was one of those people that was like, oh, the people that smoke a lot of weed are like alcoholics, right? They're just wasting their time. I was one of those. I will be the first one to admit that I had a lot of misconceptions about the substance and about its history and its benefits. Many years later, learning about cannabis, not only for recreational use, but as a botanist and an herbalist, the world opened up and I realized how incredible this botanical is. Not just and now we know, like, this is heavily documented with studies done all over the world. Unfortunately, the United States, we don't do that many studies on cannabis because it's federal. It's illegal at a federal level, so getting funding for that is very hard. But the ability the botanical has to affect our bodies on a positive level is it's on par. Is that the phrase? The word? There are very few things out there other than cannabis that can affect us the way that cannabis affects us and can benefit us the way it does. And so, to give you a little bit more of a background, when you take an apple, you eat an apple, your body has neuroreceptors and different enzymes and different systems that interact with the vitamin A and vitamin C and the phytochemicals and other nutrients of that apple. So it's not just the juices and the nutrients of the apple, but the right ratio of those nutrients that is the reason why that apple is so good for you. The same way cannabis has an effect in our body. So we have these neuroreceptors that actually take that substance and does really amazing things for us to reduce pain, to help us handle anxiety, to help us heal, potentially preventatively help us with. I think I read a study, this was probably 2 years ago, that showed people that smoke a lot of cannabis can actually have a lesser chance of stroke and neurological conditions later in life. So we will continue to learn. This is one of those botanicals that we know about enough, but we still have a lot to learn about. What I know so far makes it a really powerful botanical in my book.
Yeah, I would agree. So my maternal grandmother passed away 2 years ago. She eventually developed Alzheimer's and dementia, and she was on a whole slew of pharmaceuticals, so many different drugs, and they were causing all of these adverse effects, as these pharmaceuticals do. You could read the book of all of these things that it could cause, right?
Yeah.
So my dad was advocating to get her off of those, and he was slowly giving her microdosing of, I think he was starting with CBD. There's so many different strains of cannabis, and I am not a doctor and I'm not an expert on this, but I do know from working with my dad in this way that was one way that he was able to wean her off of pharmaceuticals and lessen her symptoms, lessen her anxiety, lessen her blood pressure, and just like her end of life care became much more of that. It became more quality. And
I think that's good. And I'm so sorry to interrupt you.
No,
This
go
is
for it.
part of the reason why it's so heartbreaking, right? Like we are, people are struggling and suffering needlessly. I think there's been a couple of cases of young people with severe neurological issues, whether it is like, what's the word that I'm looking for when people, seizures.
Yeah.
I personally know people that are cancer survivors that couldn't have gone through chemo without their little cannabis gummies. I have friends who have autistic children, and it is cannabis what helps them sleep and helps them, sort of like balance the seizures when they actually struggle with them. So
Yeah.
there's a lot out there that we could benefit from, and it's such a shame that so many of us are struggling simply because we're still, the powers that be are still too hung up on these theories from like 40 or 50 years ago.
Yeah, I agree with you. There's a lot of really good articles out there. I can link to that in this podcast in the show notes that the Cannabis Patients Pacific Northwest puts out on studies that you're referring to. So we'll definitely make sure that we have those as resources in the show notes. I want to talk a little bit about yoga instructors, and in particular right now, because I am also a yoga instructor, and no surprise, I happen to be white and, middle class. And I want to talk about decolonizing the mind and kind of like this shift towards inclusivity, which is so long overdue. And how do we do that as teachers? And how do we do that as a community? And what do you have to say on this topic?
Yeah. Look, I think that the concept of decolonizing, let me first of all sort of define what I mean by decolonizing the mind. It's essentially the idea or the conscious action of going into spaces that have traditionally been seen as spaces where only a certain type of people go to, right? Either you're white or you're wealthy or you have resources, and where traditionally people of color have felt that they don't belong or they don't feel comfortable. And it comes from this idea that in also in other ways that we have to be perfect, that we have to get to a certain goal before we are worthy of something. That comes from a history of colonization, a history of systemic policies and laws that were designed to keep certain people from advancing and others give them the upper hand. And but it translates down to almost every aspect of life. And today, I believe that not just people of color, but all of us struggle with this idea of color, of a mind that is colonized, right? Yeah. I see it all the time with clients that tell me, I'm not thin enough. When I lose those 20 pounds, then I will be ready, right? I will be perfect to then embrace certain practices or then go out there and find love or whatever it is. So you can extrapolate that to almost every aspect of life. In the case of yoga, this particular instructor that I interviewed for the book, who happens to be of Indian descent, said, I used to be one of those people, even though I was brown myself. I didn't want my white friends to know about that I practiced this when I was young. And then eventually when I became an adult and I realized that it was the in thing to do, I was like, oh, do I really want to practice the way I learned how to practice, right, in my culture? And then she realized, if I'm going to open up my space and my mind to allow other people of color to embrace it, and other people in general to embrace these practices, then I need to decolonize my mind. I need to start telling my students, it's okay if you're perfect. It's okay if we create a space that is ours. that sounds exactly the way we want it to sound, that looks like the way we want it to look, that is exactly what we need in the moment, without concern about it being too perfect or too whatever it is that all those people did in the 60s and 70s and 80s.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you for saying that. It's something that's on my mind because I show up to a class and I feel like, how do I start to become, how do I allow that? How do I create that space? And how do I help foster that inclusivity as a person who comes from a place of privilege? Do I still show up and teach? Is it time for me to take a seat? It's always kind of in my mind, like, is this appropriate still? Does that make sense?
Yeah, it's a beautiful thought process, right? It's an understanding that you don't know enough, but you want to be inclusive, right?
Yeah.
And the reality of the matter is that the person coming that looks different than you is in the same boat. It's like, I don't know,
Yeah.
but I want to learn, right? And
Yeah.
communicating is the first step. But also, there's a lot of practical things that we can do, not only emotional. Once we are powerful enough and strong enough at an emotional level, then we find little tools, right? May I go to the inner city and offer a class there? May I actually share some flyers and tell people, Tuesdays my class will be $10 or free or whatever it is. Come and join us and learn a little bit about this time tested practice that is amazing and that comes from your people, not just from ours. And then take it from there. There's a ton that we can do, but your thought process is a beautiful one and is an important one. Without it, there's no way that you can move forward with next steps.
Yeah. Oh, thank you. That's really sweet. I appreciate that. So, so I'm curious about a couple of things. One is if you personally have any daily rituals, whether it be like a morning routine or an evening routine, or practices that you implement throughout your day that helps you stay on track with your personal wellness practice.
Yes, I have a lot. So it depends on the time of the year. This is my line of work. So luckily I get to be reminded of some of these practices when I share them with clients, depending on the time of the year. So I can tell you, I'll mention what's happening right now, which is around springtime, right? And it will vary from season to season, but it's springtime. So it's time for sort of shedding, but also new beginnings. So I always start my day with some dry brushing and an herbal tea. And I tend to make my own teas. My partner and I love making teas. We always use ginger as a base for whatever reason. We just keep circling back to ginger. Right now I'm using ginger, dry peach, and red raspberries, because I've always had issues with my hormonal kind of world. And so this tea that I'm drinking right now is that, and I drink 3 or 4 cups of that. I also have 2 or 3 cups of dandelion tea because it's also very cleansing for the liver, very, very tonic like. And I eat a plant-based diet. My diet is 100% plant-based. So that's a little bit easier because, there's no like, I'm just going to add more vegetables. Like, no, all I eat is vegetables. And then at the end of the night, after I do my workouts, I always end up in a mini sauna. So I have a little mini sauna that is like, it's like my life gift to myself because I love heat and water and oil. So I lather myself with oil. I go in there 4 days a week and then sit there for like 15 minutes. And while I do that, I'll either do a little meditation or listen to a podcast or an audiobook, and I do that 4 or 5 times a week. So I'm not perfect. I don't do it. I'm not super militant. Sometimes it gets tedious and too much. The days sometimes are very long. So I aim to do it anywhere between 4 and 5 days a week. Sometimes that happens, sometimes that doesn't.
Beautiful practices. I feel so inspired. First of all, I want to go eat an apple right now. My mouth is watering. And then I want to go sit in a sauna. That sounds great. So you mentioned diet and plant-based diet, and I want to ask a particular question about the what would I call it? Pandemic, epidemic, I'm not sure what the correct word is, but of obesity in the United States.
Mm.
And in particular, how can we start to talk about this issue without fat shaming? How do we
Mm.
address it without the shame and the, because we never know like what is going on in
Yeah.
somebody's body
Yeah.
that is making them this way. Maybe it's healthy for them, maybe
Yeah.
it's not. So can you talk to me about that a little
Yeah.
bit?
Yeah, the issues of body image and fat shaming are, let's just put it out there, right? Like, we don't talk about other people's appearances, right?
Mm-hmm.
If somebody was missing an arm, you wouldn't go there and or post and be like, what happened to your arm? Like, why are you missing an arm? And what, blah, blah, blah. Even the fittest of people that are constantly posting on social media have some sort of body, like concept that they don't want to touch, right? So we try, it's not necessarily about people's appearances, it is about the ability for a body to carry you
Mm.
in health and strength and flexibility into your 50s, 60s, 70s, and beyond, right? We tend to take for granted when we're in our 20s and our 30s that this amazing thing we call a body is a machine similar to a car.
Mm-hmm.
Right? If you happen to tomorrow buy a Tesla or a Maserati or some sort of ridiculously fancy and expensive car, you would never put cheap oil in that car, right? Like, I need to be able to take good care of my car and vacuum it every day or every week or whatever people do with cars. I'm not a big car person. But I love using that analogy because we tend to take care of all the things that are important to us, right? If we buy a fancy leather bag that is designer and it costs us $3,000, we will be super careful how we treat that. When we buy a new pair of shoes, we're just super careful not to damage it. This machine we call a body is like that five-star hotel, like that amazing Maserati vehicle that is meant to carry you for the rest of your life, and it's the only one you have, right? Mm-hmm. So to me, it makes absolute sense that I want to do something today that is going to help me 30 years from now. Mm-hmm. Do you have fun with your, life is short and there will always be the 4th of July. There will always be Thanksgiving. But as I tell clients all the time, Thanksgiving is not every week. Mm-hmm. Right? So learning a little bit about what works for you is critical. One of the very first things that I tell clients when they come to me, and most people come to me want to lose some weight, mm-hmm. I tell them to do a journal, to journal their food intake for a day up to 3 days, and then understand the communication that is happening internally, right? Our bodies are constantly talking to us. Mm-hmm. What is your body telling you? Once you eat, are you gassy? Are you constipated? Do you have a foul breath? Do you feel hungry 20 minutes after you eat? Do you feel excessively full? Do you feel sad or angry at yourself for the choices you've made immediately after you've made them? And once you have clarity about that big picture and that internal conversation, then it's easier to make a plan that is just uniquely yours.
Oh, what a beautiful practice. I love that. Have you always been plant-based? Is this something that you've been practicing for a while?
Yes, I've been plant-based for a few years. I grew up in Puerto Rico eating pork chops.
Yeah, okay.
And my grandmother's chicken with rice was ridiculous. I actually became very, very ill. So I grew up in Puerto Rico and then I moved to New York when I was in my early 20s to go to school. And while I was there, again, similar to that story, I was eating anything but nutrients. I was eating Snickers bars and Wendy's, fast meals and like cereal for breakfast. Mm-hmm. And so my body started to fall apart and looking for an alternative because my conditions were not curable by Western medicine standards. Mm-hmm. I decided that I needed to find another way. And that's when I discovered herbalism and a plant-based diet, among other things. and started changing my diet, and then discovered the world of plant-based eating. And I've been a big fan ever since.
Hmm. Do you have favorite go-to meals or cookbooks that you draw from?
Favorite meals. So my favorite food on the planet these days is mushrooms. Anything with mushrooms is going to, catch my attention.
Uh-huh.
Love, love, love them. Not only because they're incredibly powerful medicinally,
Mhm.
but also because they're really tasty. They're really yummy. And while I have been plant-based for almost a decade at this point, I still miss the taste of and the texture of meat.
Mhm.
I will be the first one to admit it.
Mhm.
Mushrooms have that ability to satisfy that chewiness that meat and chicken and other flesh um, provides. So anything with mushroom is beautiful. And then the books, I love a handful of them. I will tell you one of my favorites is there's a chef called Janae Claiborne,
Mm.
and she has a book. I think the book is now 3 or 4 years old, and I think she's about to come up with another one.
Mhm.
And the original book is called Sweet Potato Soul.
Ooh, I love sweet potato.
And the recipes are really yummy, using ingredients that you will love. I love chickpeas. I love pasta. And so she includes a lot of those. They're very, very healthy, low in oil, low in sodium,
Mhm.
but very full in flavors.
Mhm. Hmm. Okay, I'll check that out. Thank you. Also, make sure we link that to the show notes.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I want to ask you again about the book. Before we started recording, I asked you if there was anything in it that you would like to read from, any favorite passages, and you mentioned a beautiful quote. I wonder if you want to share that or anything else from the book that's calling to you.
Yeah, this is we were talking about it before the recording, whether or not this was the epilogue or the dedication or whatever it is that you call it.
Yeah.
But it is a quote by Maria Sabina. Maria Sabina is probably one of the most famous curanderas or healers from Mexico. And she became really famous as the first person to allow Westerners to come and see her plant medicine healing practice. So she used certainly psilocybin and other North Mexican and Northern Native American kind of substances, but she became famous because of her psilocybin practice.
Okay.
For those of you who don't know what psilocybin is, it's essentially magic mushrooms, which I am also a big fan of. But I digress. Anyway, the quote says, "Heal yourself with beautiful love. Always remember, you are the medicine."
That's so gorgeous. I love that. Thank you for sharing. Would you mind reading it one more time?
Yeah, sure. Put my glasses back on.
Sorry.
That's totally fine. It says, "Heal yourself with beautiful love. Always remember, you are the medicine."
Ah.
And isn't it just so powerful, right? Like if you go pretty much anywhere around the world, traditional Chinese medicine, Ayurveda, traditional African healing practices, the druids and the healers and the that were called witches back in the British Isles many years ago, they all the healers and the shamans in South and Central America, they all tell you, you are the medicine. You have the ability to heal yourself. Certainly before our bodies get to a point where they are broken beyond return, and then we will need Western medicine to help us actually kind of sort of like push us back into some sort of balance. Before we get to that point, we have the ability to restore balance in our bodies and potentially heal.
Jovanka, I love this conversation. It's been so fun talking to you. I'm going to say the title of your book one more time. Reclaiming Wellness, Ancient Wisdom for Your Healthy, Happy, and Beautiful Life. And here I'm showing again the cover page. Gosh, the light's so harsh. But I'll make sure that we link this in the show notes because I highly recommend picking up your own copy, supporting Jovanka, supporting your body, I mean,
Mhm.
if you needed any sort of motivation, inspiration, I think this is the episode to start to really treat your body as a temple, as something that is sacred, as something that is a gift, and to honor that. Is there anything else you want to add before we say goodbye?
I just want people to remember that whether or not we feel like this is ours to reclaim or not, the book it was essentially written to help you recognize that these practices have been with you and they're part of your DNA. They have been passed on from generation to generation, and it is not only your birthright, but it's almost your duty, right, to honor them and to allow them into your lives for your benefit, but also for the benefit of the generations that come after you.
Yeah, I love that. Let's keep passing it on to future
Mhm.
generations and future generations. So thank you so much for memorializing it, and now here we can hold it in our hands. It's been such a blessing to spend time with you, Jovanka. Thank you so much.
It's been such a pleasure. I love your energy. I can't wait to meet your father.
Yeah, I'll have to introduce you to him. I think
And
you two would hit it off. Well, everyone, that concludes another amazing episode of Outside the Studio. I hope you enjoyed yourself. I hope you learned something new, maybe remembered something old, maybe felt inspired to apply something to your life. You can hear my dog in the background. She's doing a little happy dance. So Daisy enjoyed it. Anyhow, I wanted to just pop in here to wrap us up to say a couple of things. Number one, I have such an amazing team that helps me put these podcasts together. Without them, I wouldn't, be able to bring these amazing conversations to you. So thank you to my producer, my director of creative services, my sound editor, my engineer, Consistency Media. Don't know what I would do without you. Thank you, thank you, thank you. And the amazing creation and artistic musical genius, Drew Lovern. Thank you so much for putting together this music specifically for Outside the Studio. So unique to the show, only place you're ever going to hear it is right here. Thanks, you guys. You make my world go round. Stay well, everyone. Thank you for listening. Don't forget to subscribe, rate, and review, share on the socials, especially if it's a show that you think, hey, this could help somebody else. That's what this is all about, right? We're sharing information so that we're better, so that we're inspired, so that we're lifting each other up, and we're learning how to be in this world, living on this planet to the best of our ability, sharing information and inspiring one another. And that's my hope. That's my hope for the show. Take care.